28-year-old Sarah here recently reached a significant life goal, purchasing her first house. Years of frugal living and saving paid off. When I at last got a comfortable small space of my own, though it was not a mansion, it was ideal for me, a peaceful refuge in a good area. Having a place that really belonged to me was amazing, evidence of all my diligence and preparation. When I told them, my folks, blessed their souls, were ecstatic. I thought it really wonderful when they volunteered to assist with some small modifications right away. They insisted it was their way of showing support, and it seemed like a good approach to honor this new chapter. I agreed, imagining here a fresh coat of paint and some landscaping there. Not particularly important. But my folks, well, they get very carried away. Their helpful visits became an everyday event, very fast. Every time they turned up, they brought a fresh guest, a friend, a distant relative, even the elderly woman from down the street. It was as though my house turned into the neighborhood travel destination. Though I brushed it aside, I thought it a little excessive. They loved presenting family achievements and were proud of me, particularly since Jessica, my younger sister, was the golden kid. She had always attracted the most attention, and was 3 years younger. She had everything she wanted growing up. Should Jessica wish for a pony, they would get her a stable. She maxed out their credit cards if she wanted a fancy dress. Though I love my sister, it was no secret she was always favored. And lately Jessica had become engaged to her fiancé, with similarly high tastes. Though lacking the royal budget, they were organizing a royal fitting wedding. My parents were discussing how rapidly the expenses were growing out of control. Though I hardly paid much attention, they sounded tense. Their goal to make her day unforgettable made sense. Then odd things began to happen. Suddenly, my folks started inquiring about the value of my house. Still, lowing on the mortgage. How much? Had I ever given refinancing any thought? Though strange, I didn't give it much thought. Since they had never shown any interest in my finances, I figured they were simply curious. 1 week later, they asked me over for dinner. To be sure, they even required I bring my mortgage and property records. Although it seemed entirely pointless, it was presumably for safety concerns. Still, I consented, as I wanted to avoid stirring any problems. With hindsight, I ought to have been more dubious. I began hearing weird stuff from my neighbors about this time. They would mention casually seeing a house exactly like mine posted online. Though I puzzled myself, I dismissed it as a coincidence. One acquaintance then emailed me a link to a real estate listing. It was my house, furnished with inside pictures. The images came from the repairs my parents had been helping with. I had no understanding why or how my house was for sale. My blood cooled, equipped with the indisputable evidence. The real estate listing with pictures shot inside my house. I straight-faced my parents. They could no longer act dumb. They first tried to minimize it, claiming they were merely exploring options should I ever decide to sell. I was not buying it though. I insisted on a straight response. Why would they list my residence without even acquiring of me? At last, the truth came to light. They came clean about listing the house to assist with Jessica's dream wedding financing. They said it was all for the benefit of family happiness. And since I had realized my dream of owning a house, it was only reasonable to assist Jessica in realizing hers. They continued endlessly on how she deserved the marriage of her dreams and how the equity in my house might make it feasible, simply because they had assisted me with modifications. My parents really felt they had a voice in how my house may be used. The sense of entitlement was astounding. I made it very clear that my house was not for sale, and that it was most definitely not a bank funding Jessica's lavish wedding. Still, they wouldn't let it go. They experimented with every strategy the book offers. Guilt trips, emotional blackmail, even bringing up years ago actions they did for me. They reminded me of how much they had given me growing up and said I was putting money above family. For them, my refusal to sell the house rejected the family itself as much as Jessica's desire. I stayed still. I said again that they had crossed a major line and that the house was not for sale. Then came the call from Jessica personally. She was crying, furious and wounded, telling me I was spoiling her wedding and charging me with selfish behavior. She said I had no right to deny her one thing after all the family had helped me over the years. It's done, but I held fast. I clarified that I had no obligation to sell my house to pay for her fantasy wedding. I then told the full event to a couple of close friends. As startled as I was, they comforted me right away as I had every right to guard my house. They reminded me that the actions of my family were totally out of line and urged me to keep my ground. Word immediately went around the family and responses were divided. Some relatives understood me and said it was absurd for my parents to list my house without my approval. Others on the other hand supported my parents and argued I should volunteer for family harmony. Not sacrificing my house for a wedding made me feel as though I was unexpectedly the villain in this twisted narrative. A few days later my parents gave me an ultimatum. Either I sold the house voluntarily or I would have to deal with the family's collective displeasure. They made it abundantly evident that I would basically be disowned if I deviated. Hearing my own parents outline such a difficult decision over a wedding that in truth had nothing to do with me was weird. I understood at that time I needed legal guidance. I contacted a lawyer, outlining the whole matter. The attorney encouraged me to use some caution even though my family could not legally sell my house without my permission. I should first make sure none of the locks allow anyone to access the property without my authorization. They also advised keeping any valuables and sensitive records in case my parents tried more intervention. I replaced the locks and kept my paperwork secure right away using their guidance. But my folks didn't stop there. Not long after our meeting, they started airing their complaints on social media. They made long theatrical statements about how I had turned my back on the family and was selfishly clinging to money that would fulfill hopes for my sister. They portrayed me as some cold-blooded villain, which resulted in an attack of remarks from family, acquaintances and distant relatives, most of whom knew nothing about the whole truth. Seeing people I hardly knew evaluating me hurt, but I resisted letting it affect me. Then Jessica's fiancé became active, reaching out to reason with me. He advised me to take into account the family's wishes and see how much happiness I might bring about by small sacrifice. It was abundantly evident that the strain would only be rising. I came to see that I had to be ready for a far more major conflict if I wanted to guard my house and myself. That resolution helped me to get ready for whatever might lie ahead. This was about advocating for my rights and not about a house or a marriage. Equipped with the cease and desist letter, I became rebellious. My parents had no legal title to my house. My attorney had made quite apparent. Delivered with a firm knock on their door, the letter insisted they remove the ad and stop all illegal activity involving my property. It clearly stated in plain language the results of their actions. Any more intervention could result in major legal implications. They responded quickly and forcefully. Their eyes glowed with anger, not regret. Rather than back down, they labeled the letter a betrayal and accused me of legal harassment. They said my selfish refusal to help with my sister's wedding was dragging the family into needless strife. That letter turned into the tipping point, separating us more broadly. My parents denied any responsibility. Rather, they intensified things online, writing dramatic updates depicting me as the villain, separating the family over a little money. My mother bemoaned how I had turned against them, heartbroken that I would put money before love. The posts were ambiguous enough to fool anyone who knew the real situation, and shortly distant relatives and family friends were leaving comments in their favor. Some even messaged me personally, loaded with criticism and condemnation. Jessica chose to personally approach me just as I felt things could not get worse. She arrived at my house unexpectedly. Enraged, she argued that my house had always been family property, accusing me of being jealous of her happiness, and said I had no right to keep it all to myself when the family needed it for something as vital as her wedding. I stayed below the bait. I gently underlined that I had no intention of selling the house. It was legally mine and I had paid my own hard-earned money for it. That merely appeared to aggravate her. She left me wondering how things had gotten so rapidly. As she rushed off, my folks phoned the following day with fresh demands. They urged I give them a big loan instead, as I wasn't ready to sell the house. Given the once-in-a-lifetime character of Jessica's wedding, they contended that, as family, I owed it to them in whatever capacity I could. I said no and remained cool. I owed nothing. Hence their requests seemed out of line. Their answer was to totally cut off contact with me. They stopped inviting me to family get-together, and shortly I began to hear from other relatives claiming I had turned away everyone. My parents clearly were trying to distance me, expecting the quiet treatment would cause me to cave. The hurt is great, yet my close pals were right by me. They reminded me that I was doing morally, and without their help, I'm not sure how I would have maintained my commitment. A few days later, I got a call from the real estate agent who had visited my place prior. My parents had at last deleted the listing. Following the cease and desist letter they told me, though it was a relief, I couldn't get rid of the sense that this wasn't over. Shortly later, my suspicions were validated when I discovered my locks appeared different. One evening at home, Though small, I could see they had been altered. Initially, I assumed someone had tried to break in, probably in response to the legal letter, perhaps in reprisal. I thought it was time to build a security system, and promptly phoned a locksmith to change every lock once more. After everything that had transpired, I couldn't take any chances. Even though I didn't want to believe my own family could stoop to this degree, I was beginning to pay for the tension, to sort through the emotional mess this family betrayal had left behind. I chose to begin treatment. Every session enabled me to separate the layers of guilt and manipulation I had not even noticed influencing me. The therapist helped me see how firmly ingrained these family relationships were, and how important it was to establish limits. Even within a family, my parents did not cease, though. They carried on their smear campaign inside the extended family, building a story in which I was the selfish daughter, more concerned with her money than with maintaining the family. The narrative went fast, and before long, I was receiving letters from relatives I hadn't seen in years, all expressing disappointment, and charging me with erasing family togetherness. I responded by beginning to record every exchange I had with my parents, Jessica, and any relative who got in touch. In case things got hot once more, I wanted a clean record of all that had been said and done. Maintaining a record also helped me to feel in charge of the circumstances, as though I were at last acting to properly defend myself. In spite of the anarchy, I discovered my will strengthening. Every effort to guilt, every rumor they disseminated, all served to confirm that I had made the right decision. Not even my family was I going to allow someone to destroy the life I had painstakingly created. A few weeks later, despite all, I felt drawn to go to a family get-together. Although I knew it would be tense, part of me wanted to clear the record. Having poisoned the well, my parents wanted me to tell people who had been misled my truth. Knowing this might be my only opportunity to talk to some relatives who had bought into my parents' warped story, I sharpened myself. The tension was strong enough to cut with a knife right away when I arrived. While some families seemed uncomfortable yet inquisitive, others threw me contemptuous looks. Not long after, someone raised the issue, wondering why I was not supporting the family during such a critical period. That was my introduction. Commonly, I went over everything, beginning with my parents, listing my house without my knowledge or permission. I went over their pressure strategies, their attempts to have me sell my house to pay for Jessica's wedding, and how they turned to isolating me and spreading stories when I objected. As I spoke, the room went still. Some cousins appeared startled, obviously hearing the whole truth for the first time. Others stayed dubious, anchored on the conviction that my parents had good intentions. Face flushed, my parents hated being put on the spot. They exploded, accusing me of turning everyone against them and labeling me a traitor who had always put herself last. It was a theatrical production precisely as I had anticipated. Their fury, however, backfired. A few relatives really spoke up. Incredulity at my parents crossing so many boundaries expressed. They had no idea things had spiraled so wildly. As I assumed things would cool off, Jessica walked in. She stormed fiercely into the discussion, accusing me I was very entitled to present my version of events. I then decided it was time to go totally no contact with my parents and Jessica. I told friends and relatives not to forward any communications from them and block them on all means of contact. Enough was sufficient. Enforcing tight limits was the only way I could shield myself from their poisonous actions. 1 week later, I got a private note from Jessica's fiancé. He felt bad about his part in the situation and acknowledged he hadn't known my parents had been so manipulative. He even mentioned he attempted approaching Jessica about moving ahead without depending on my house money, but she hadn't been receptive. Though I appreciated his getting in touch, I realized this was still too little, too late. My family, out of my life at last, brought me some respite. Knowing that I had complete control over my house once more was empowering. The security system I had built offered me peace of mind. I concentrated on restoring my equilibrium and surrounded myself with friends who had always been there for me. They turned into my chosen family, the folks I knew I could trust without doubt. I began discovering fresh approaches to make use of my space, picking interests and even planning little get-together with buddies to bring wonderful memories into my house. Knowing that I was free from the drama and control that had dragged me down for so long, made every day more peaceful. That chapter with my family was closing, and I was ready to start anew, defining my life in respect, trust, and independence. Following no contact, a peculiar quiet descended on my life. The never-ceasing assault of calls, messages, and guilt trips stopped. I changed my number, blocked Jessica and my parents on every platform, and created a fortification of silence around myself. It felt calm. I knew, though, they wouldn't remain silent for very long. Following form, their irritation burst on social media within days. Masters of public opinion. My parents started a campaign of subtly accusing words and emotional appeals. They presented themselves as victims of a callous daughter who had left them in their hour of need, posting about family loyalty and treachery. They underlined their sacrifices, so distorting the story to seem that I owed them my very life. The aftermath moved like a wildfire. But barred with these one-sided blogs, extended family members began to seek out. Some persuaded me to go back to see my family. Others fortunately gave silent support, while noting the deceptive strategies my parents were using. A few even admitted that the drama had blinded them as well. But today they recognized the reality in my behavior. Therapies turned into my haven during all this. It helped me sort the emotional baggage of severing my family, the residual remorse and self-doubt that murmur sneaky lies. My therapist helped me see that I wasn't in charge of cleaning the mess my parents had produced, and that establishing limits was normal, even required. For me, my rock was my buddies. They gathered around me, a furious and devoted barrier against the storm. They reassured me I wasn't alone, honored my fortitude, and really loved and supported the role left by my family. We drew near, creating a chosen family, anchored on respect and trust. Following the counsel of my attorney, I painstakingly recorded every exchange, every note, every occurrence. I even reported the police about my parents trying to list my house without my permission. This paper trail, this proof of their transgression, provided legal defense and control. My attorney told me my house was really mine, and my parents had no rights to my possessions. Then out of the blue, Jessica's fiancé sent a note. He said he hadn't understood the whole degree of my parents' control. Their contrived crises had blinded him, and he had been caught in the bridal whirl-around. Although I valued his apologies, they seemed insufficient. Too late. My family out of the picture turned my attention to safeguarding my financial future. After looking over my funds and adjusting my budget, I became really proud of the freedom I had created. This encounter had shown me the need of depending on myself, and of standing on my 2 feet. The tide started to change, as word of my parents' deeds gradually filtered through the wider family. Startled by the extent my parents had gone to, some relatives withdrew themselves, others admitted the injustice I had experienced and freely attacked their actions. This surprising help was like a salve for my injuries, evidence that I was not the villain they had in mind. I welcomed fresh challenges and personal development. As I went on, along with joining a book club, and even hosting a little housewarming party with friends, I investigated past times I had always wanted to try. It was amazing. The first time I had guests in my house free from the reach out through guilt-ridden texts, or distant relatives, but I disregarded them. I saw these efforts for what they were. Management veiled as reconciliation. Sweet discourse or sentimental nostalgia cannot undo their acts. Through mutual friends, I discovered that budgetary limitations had greatly scaled down Jessica's wedding, though I soon reminded myself that it was a result of their own aspirations, which had been established on a basis of entitlement and manipulation. The strain inside my family persisted. Faced with the results of their behavior, my parents were working through the ramifications. Their web of deception was disintegrating, and the family they had sought to control was sliding away from them. All the same, I stayed steadfast in my no-contact choice. I turned my attention to reconstructing my life away from the family's strife. When I looked back, I saw how much I had matured through this crisis. Though unpleasant, setting limits had been essential. Having come to give my personal well-being top priority, I felt firstly rather empowered, emphasizing the value of self-respect and independence. I posted my path online and counseled others, going through comparable challenges. People thanked me for my integrity and urged me to keep strong. Thus, the response was rather favorable, knowing that respect and independence will define my destiny, instead of manipulation or duty, finally helped me to find peace. This trip had shown me that family ties shouldn't sacrifice personal limits, and that I was at last ready to go on. Past and its drama far behind. Time polished the sharp edges of my suffering, much as a river's consistent flow. The searing hurts of betrayal healed slowly, leaving scars that acted as markers of my fortitude. Once a battleground of family strife, life became a calm terrain of my own creation. Once a cause for conflict, my house became a haven. I laughed and warmed it, throwing events with my chosen family, The folks who had supported me through good times and bad. We ate, told tales, and dreamed together to create a love and support tapestry, more robust than any blood link. Anxiety and fear did not define my days. I woke up knowing exactly what I wanted to do, ready to seize the chances that presented themselves. I gave my all to develop personally, pursue fresh interests, and tend to old ones. Along with learning to play the guitar, I joined a hiking club, and began helping a nearby animal shelter. Once limited by family conflict, the globe opened out to show its grandeur and beauty. I visited locations I had only dreamed of, fully engaged in many cultures, and interacted with people from all walks of life. Every trip revealed fresh angles and increased respect for the dependence of all things. Every now and again, rumors about my family would find me, carried on the gust of gossip. I had heard that despite the scale back, Jessica's wedding had proceeded. My parents were still dealing with the consequences of their own dishonesty, their reputation damaged. These, however, were far-off echoes diminishing daily. I had created a life free from responsibility and manipulation. Really mine, my choices were personal. My achievements were personal. My happiness was personal. True family I had discovered was characterized by shared ideals, respect and unflinching support rather than by blood. One evening I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunset color the sky, gold and red, when I felt great thankfulness. Having withstood the storm, come out stronger, and discovered a tranquility I had never experienced before. Although the road had been difficult, the benefits were almost unbounded. Setting limits, speaking my truth, and standing up for what I believed in, all of which I had come to see as vital. Forgiveness, I had discovered, was a gift I could offer myself, not a debt I owed to anyone who had offended me. Most importantly, though, I had come to see that I deserved love, respect, and a joyful existence. I prayed thanks to the universe as the stars arose, glittering like diamonds against the velvet heavens. I was appreciative of the difficulties that had molded me, of the friends who had supported me, and of the house that had come to represent my fortitude. My narrative was about discovering my voice, claiming my power, and building a life that respected my real self. Not about a house or a marriage. It was a narrative of metamorphosis, of releasing the bonds of the past, and welcoming an infinitely possible future. And I realized my trip was far from finished. As I gazed out at the vastness of the night sky, mountains still to ascend, rivers to cross, and aspirations to pursue still abound. But I confronted the future with a heart full of hope, and a spirit untenable for breaking, for I had discovered my actual home, not inside a house but rather deep inside my own spirit. Story 2. Lena here, and I am 27. 21 is my younger brother Ethan. He is the epitome of a mom's boy, a full-fledged man-child, unable to operate without someone satisfying every whim. This has been the situation since the day of his birth. My parents merely thought he was the center of the universe. He has no particular demands, or anything. When I mention my parents, I mostly mean my mom. She is 50 and following Ethan's birth, she underwent a total 180. From a devoted mother to, well, one of those internet-famous boy moms went lives and breathed for her sons. The only person who has ever truly had my back was my grandfather. My dad, also 50, has always been there for me in his own way, but he has never had the guts to challenge my mother and truly give me a chance to shine. Now, 70, he never particularly liked Ethan, called my parents constantly on their favoritism. We have a unique relationship. I remind him of my grandmother, his wife, who died years ago. Ethan, of course, tries to toss it in my face that mom loves him more. However, he lives across the country, and I don't see him very frequently. He is a spoiled brat, really a horrible person. His only ability is football, which, surprise, won him a scholarship to a decent out-of-state college. I can't even count how many times I got in trouble for things that were actually his fault or for things he had done better than me. Years later, I discovered that with that scholarship, my parents actually handed him the money to purchase a house and a car. They never paid a thing for my education either. Apparently, they stated, my college fund went to post-fire bills. At a public university, I met Daniel, the love of my life. I moved out of my parents' house, made incredible friends, and started a life for me. He was the first person there that really saw me for me. Before we ever got together, Daniel and I were great friends for many years. Now that both of us are doing really well and successful in our professions, that leads me to the main problem. Daniel first proposed a year ago. Being somewhat private folks, we kept it quiet. My parents responded brilliantly when I informed them. But that was it. We agreed to hold a modest wedding surrounded by simply close friends and relatives. Though they never RSVP'd, my dad and brother did actually persuade me to invite my mom and Ethan. Every time I visited, my mother would merely chat over me, flaunting Ethan's successes and outrageous exploits. Then she would start organizing my wedding without even asking me what I wanted. At last, I had had enough. One day I stopped her and informed her. I was specifically scheduling the wedding for a particular day. I wanted them there, but she remarked casually, they couldn't make it, since Ethan had his championship game that day. Shocker, right? If it conflicted with something Ethan had going on, they had missed my ballet performances, my graduations, everything. I was furious. I made the decision to be small-hearted. Fast forward a few weeks, and I got married. I didn't say that it was my wedding. I just claimed it was an event, and that missing it wouldn't really matter. It was exactly right. Along with Daniel's family, my friends were there, and even my grandfather came to escort me down the aisle. He seemed quite delighted for me. When several inquired where my parents were, I simply answered they had to make it to Ethan's game. Daniel and I went on our honeymoon, totally unplugged. Grandpa was a little offended, but that was it. When we returned, let us just say a storm was building. Turning on my phone, I was inundated with alerts before I could even unlock it, mostly from my mom and Ethan. Ethan was launching obscenities and calling me names. The post went viral in their small town, and apparently my aunt had posted wedding pictures on Facebook with a not-so-subtle dig at my parents for not being there. Suddenly, everyone was criticizing her for how she treated me. It turns out my grandpa had even gone to see them, and given her some of his mind. For my dad, this looks to have been the last straw. My mom was blowing up my phone since he was so offended about missing my wedding and his own father's criticism, and finally stood up to her and threatened to divorce her if she didn't make things right. It started with all angry messages, and then changed to become begging and appealing. Daniel and I are home now, figuring out our next move, saying she's devastated that she missed it. My mom's sisters and friends are causing me trouble for not clearly stating it was my wedding. Many of my relatives, including those I didn't invite, have apologized, claiming they had no idea how horrible things were at home. But really, I don't buy it. I did to find my folks I was getting married. Like everyone else, I issued them a paper invitation. Not RSVP'd were my parents, Ethan, some distant relatives, and a few individuals on Daniel's side. Everyone responded when I followed up. Those who didn't claim they couldn't make it. I texted my mother and brother, but they ignored me. Knowing about Ethan's plan, I omitted mentioning the date exactly. Every time I tried to discuss the wedding, they would tell me to quit acting like a pain, and that certain things were more important. Looking back, I suppose I ought to have simply given up then. It was not worth the work. I did not keep my marriage under wraps. I simply didn't rub it in their faces, hoping they would be startled, and maybe even somewhat inquisitive. I did bring up the wedding with my aunts and uncles. Mom occasionally even made herself present in room. Ethan and my dad had gone quiet. She would just smile and say, "That's great dear," then veer off the topic. After high school, college, and beyond grad school, I used to attempt to avoid touch with them, but they guilt-tripped me constantly, putting on my mom, aunts, and grandparents. They drew me back in every time I tried to distance myself. This time feels different. Perhaps it's because I now have Daniel by my side. I'm more confident and stronger. Still, I have to decide what to do next. It has been a world around. As I mentioned, most of Dad's family is on the opposite side of the nation. I didn't truly know how they felt about me for a very long time. I kept in touch with my dad's side, but I never mentioned the abuse again. When I was 14, I tried to tell them how my parents were treating me. My aunts, uncles, and grandpa all gave them an earful, but when I got home, I was punished so severely. I was convinced I had made it all up. Grandpa was the only one who knew. He was always scared that if he tried to step in, I would start to resent him. It's crucial to note that I now reside in a different town than my parents. Actually, they hardly know my present address at all. Once Ethan tried to get into my previous flat in order to steal money. My mother actually justified him by claiming, "Siblings share things." I moved since then. I used to live in a metropolis, roughly 1 hour's distance from their small village. To be clear, my parents did not purchase Ethan a house or car before high school, definitely not telling them where I live now. When he became 16, they got him a car. Later, when he was 18, they bought him a house close to his college, though they did not use it immediately. They lied to me about spending my college fund for him. They just kept it. Someone wondered if things would have been different if people realized it was my wedding, not just an event. Honestly, I have a feeling my parents would have found a way to destroy it nonetheless. Once, they actually set off a scene at my cousin's wedding, which made the whole story about Ethan having just aced his first college exam, and then becoming intoxicated and shattering a piece of cake quite interesting. In my family, going no contact, or even low contact, is a major no-no. Hence, I'm not sure why I bothered asking them in the first place. Speaking of my cousin, she was the one who pointed out that my dad, not being at my wedding, was a significant problem for him. My cousin ended up cutting them off after that, and they chastised her for turning her back on family over a minor incident. I messaged my dad and stated I wanted to meet with him, my mom and Ethan the next day at a neutral site. He answered straight away and agreed. We gathered in a park, and my dad's brother and sisters accompanied us. Most likely for damage control, like he had been for days. My dad looked terrible,